Imagine a power unbound by law, unlimited by borders, and driven by a single motive: profit on an unimaginable scale. A criminal empire had grown so vast, it no longer operated in the shadows. It craved a demonstration of its power under the searing sun, an arrogant challenge to the world. Our story begins with that very arrogance. The 12th of July, 2025, 1:12 a.m. The southern Arizona desert was a sprawling furnace, the air thick and shimmering with heat distorted distant images, making them dance like phantoms. Across this brutal landscape, a steel serpent slithered. 19 armored trucks, painted in matte black to absorb the light and project intimidation, tore through the sand with a steady, confident pace. A plume of red dust billowed in their wake, a harbinger of destruction. This was no ordinary smuggling run conducted under the cloak of darkness. This was a parade of power. Inside the steel-reinforced cargo bays lay 7.2 tons of synthetic drugs, a figure difficult to comprehend. Enough poison to drown major cities, enough to shatter millions of lives. And on the American black market, it was worth over $420 million, the kind of money that buys armies, politicians, and silence. And protecting this colossal fortune was a small army of its own. Over 80 gunmen clad in desert fatigues with their faces obscured by bandanas sat crammed in truck beds and cabins. Their weapons were not cheap pistols. They were equipped like a light infantry unit. AK-47 and AR-15 assault rifles glinted in the sunday. 50 caliber heavy machine guns were mounted on the roofs of the 3 lead vehicles, their barrels scanning from side to side like predators marking territory. Radios crackled constantly in Spanish, commands were shouted, and assurances were exchanged. They believed the road ahead was clear, that their bosses in Mexico had paid off everyone who needed to be paid off. Their confidence was not unfounded. For years, the organization known as La Serpiente de Acero, the Steel Serpent, had built a network of corruption and intimidation that stretched across the border. They believed they had neutralized local law enforcement and even compromised federal officials. They believed America, preoccupied with its foreign wars, had grown soft, its own backyard left unguarded. This shipment was the ultimate test of that theory. A message sent in steel and speed. We can drive across your land in broad daylight, and there's nothing you can do about it. But they didn't know that at 26,000 feet, where the air is thin and cold, an unblinking eye watched their every move. An MQ-9 Reaper drive, one loitering invisibly against the brilliant blue sky. It made no sound that could be heard from the ground. It simply observed. Its thermal sensors saw not trucks, but 19 brilliant hotspots on the move. It tracked every glowing engine block, every tap of a brake light, every desperate radio signal bouncing off the sand. Every minute detail was relayed to a command center at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. There, in a cold, artificially lit room, 12 massive screens displayed a real-time, 3D map of the region. The convoy was not an approaching threat. It was a set of calculated variables. Their speed, the distance between vehicles, even the estimated weight of each truck was being logged and measured by the second. To the cartel, the safe border was just ahead. But to the men watching the screens, that border had been sealed long ago. They weren't driving to safety. They were driving into a canyon, chosen with surgical precision, where every escape route had been cut off before their first tire ever touched the soil. Their arrogant parade was about to end, and they were completely blissfully unaware. The Steel Serpent was slithering straight into the mouth of a much larger predator, one that had been waiting patiently in the shadows. To set the perfect trap, you cannot rely on strength alone. You need something far more critical, near superhuman patience, and an intimate understanding of your prey. For 7 days before the convoy of La Serpiente de Acero ever appeared, the Arizona desert had been the stage for a deadly silent play performed by ghosts. These ghosts were members of the U.S. Navy Special Warfare Development Group, better known as SEAL Team 6. They were not ordinary soldiers. They were specialists in asymmetric warfare, masters of clandestine operations, and one of the most elite and highly trained fighting forces on the planet. Deployed on their home turf, their capabilities were virtually limitless. For those 7 days, SEAL reconnaissance teams lived and breathed the desert. They moved primarily at night when the temperature dropped and the darkness offered cover. By day, they vanished into perfectly camouflaged hides, small nests dug into hillsides or tucked beneath rocky overhangs. They lay motionless for hours, enduring the 115-degree heat, the assault of insects, and the constant mental strain. They watched, they listened, they recorded everything. They mapped wildlife migration routes, noted wind direction at different times of day, and analyzed the texture of every rock and crevice in the canyon selected as the kill zone. Using advanced optics, they marked firing positions with a special infrared paint invisible to the naked eye, but glowing brightly through specialized scopes. These marks formed a web of fire that covered the entire canyon, ensuring there were no dead zones. Every potential piece of enemy cover was in the crosshairs of at least 2 sniper teams. Beneath the sand, a different, more meticulous and dangerous work was underway. Explosives experts had buried M18A1 Claymore directional mines in staggered layers at both ends of the canyon. A Claymore is not a conventional bomb. It is a giant shotgun that, when triggered, unleashes a hurricane of 700 steel ball bearings in a 60-degree arc, capable of shredding anything within 50 meters. Their purpose here was not to annihilate the convoy, but to instantly seal the entrance and exit, creating a barrier of steel and chaos that would lock the serpent in its cage. The detonation cords for each mine were carefully run to hidden positions above. To ensure the timing of the attack was perfect, small seismic sensors, so sensitive they could detect the footsteps of a coyote, were buried along the path. These sensors would register the vibrations from the convoy's engines, feeding data back to the command center. Only when the final sensor signaled the 19th truck had fully passed, and the first sensor confirmed the lead truck had not yet exited the canyon, would the order to strike be given. While the hunters on the ground prepared the physical trap, the operators in the air were watching the bigger picture. The MQ-9 Reaper was more than a flying camera. It was an intelligence-gathering hub. It could intercept radio communications, identify weapon types by their shape and heat signature, and relay data to another waiting beast, an AC-negative 130 joules Ghost Rider. The Ghost Rider circled at a safe distance, high and quiet beyond the convoy's range of sight and sound. This was not a bomber. It was a flying battleship designed for precision fire support. Along its left side was an array of terrifying weaponry, a 30mm cannon capable of firing armor-piercing rounds at a blistering rate, and a 105mm howitzer that could level a small building in a single shot. Its gunners didn't aim with the naked eye. They used a complex system of thermal and optical sensors, allowing them to lock onto targets with absolute precision day or night. Laser-guided munitions and flares sat ready in its bays. By the morning of the 7th day, everything was set. The canyon, an anonymous fissure in the desert, had been transformed into a meticulously crafted cage, 600 meters long, 40 meters high, and just wide enough for 2 trucks to pass side by side. 160 SEAL operators lay silent in their positions. Rifles locked and loaded their scopes, giving off a faint green glow in the Arizona heat. Every detail was calculated: the choke point, the timing, the angles of fire. A silence fell. It was not the silence of an empty desert, but the silence of a predator holding its breath, waiting for its prey to take the final step. The silent hunters had done their work. Now they just had to wait. Take a moment to truly understand the place the La Serpiente de Acero convoy was entering. To them, it was just a shortcut, a dry canyon that allowed them to bypass main roads and potential checkpoints. The high cliff walls on either side offered a sense of security, shielding them from distant eyes. But in military terminology, this place had another, more ominous name: the kill box. A kill box isn't just an ambush site. It's a tactical concept, a 3-dimensional space engineered to maximize destruction and eliminate any possibility of escape. This canyon was chosen not for its beauty, but for its perfect geometry. Picture it as a long, narrow hallway. The nearly vertical walls, made of hard sandstone, not only restricted movement to the sides, but also served another critical function: they amplified sound and shock waves. An explosion inside the canyon wouldn't dissipate into open space. Instead, its energy would ricochet off the walls, creating a reverberating effect, increasing its destructive power and causing extreme disorientation for anyone trapped inside. Gunshots would echo, making it nearly impossible to pinpoint the shooters' locations. The canyon floor, the path the convoy was on, was covered in loose gravel and sand. This meant any attempt to turn a vehicle around or drive off the main path would be incredibly difficult. Wheels would sink, turning the vehicles into stationary targets. Now place the elements of the trap into this context. The Claymore minefields at either end were not just gates, they were psychological triggers. The first explosion would not only cripple the lead vehicle, but send a clear message to the rest. The way forward is blocked. The instinct of any driver would be to attempt a U-turn, but moments later, the explosion at the rear would extinguish that hope. The way back is also gone. In a matter of seconds, 19 trucks and 80 gunmen would realize they were caged. Panic would set in. During that chaos, the SEAL sniper teams on the cliffs would act as conductors. They were organized into small teams, each responsible for a specific sector of the canyon. Their priority was not to kill as many as possible, but to eliminate the greatest threats first, the gunners on the 50 caliber machine guns, anyone with a grenade launcher, and anyone who looked like they were trying to organize a counterattack. By taking out these command and control nodes and heavy weapons, they would reduce an organized force to a chaotic mob, fighting for individual survival. And then there was the third dimension. While the cartel was trapped on a two-dimensional plane on the canyon floor, the SEALs had total control of the space above. They could fire down from multiple angles, making cover all but useless. Hide behind a truck. A sniper from the other side would have a perfect shot. Duck under a vehicle. Rounds from the AC-130's 30mm cannon could easily punch through the floorboards. The AC-130 Ghost Rider was the final element that turned this kill box into a true hellscape. It could loiter continuously overhead, far out of range of conventional weapons, and rain down an unceasing torrent of fire. More importantly, it could see what the snipers could not: heat signatures. A gunman hiding behind a rock, thinking he was safe, would show up as a bright white bloom on the gunner's screen. A group trying to rally in the shadow of an overturned truck would be spotted instantly. There was nowhere to hide. At 1:3 a.m., as the first truck rolled past the invisible line of seismic sensors, the kill box began to close. It was the quiet before the storm. The SEALs held their breath, fingers resting on their triggers. In the command center, the red dots representing the convoy slowly filled the designated red box on the map. All the elements, terrain, weaponry, technology, and human psychology were aligned. The play was about to begin. The steel serpent had slithered completely inside the box, and the lid was about to be slammed shut. Even the most perfect plan is only a single heartbeat away from disaster. The difference between a stunning victory and a catastrophic failure often lies in one unforeseen detail, one unexpected variable that can cause the entire structure to collapse. For the ambush in the Arizona Canyon, that moment came at 1:23 a.m. As the first three trucks rolled past the seismic sensors, all systems were green. In the command center, officers stared at the screens, waiting for all 19 red dots to fill the kill box. On the cliffs, SEAL operators made micro-adjustments to their positions, their hearts pounding in their chests. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. And then, the first thing went wrong. On one of the screens displaying the status of the minefields, a red warning flashed. The detonation circuit for a single Claymore mine at the entrance had failed to arm. It could have been a loose connection, a software glitch, or an animal disturbing the wire. The reason didn't matter. The consequence was terrifying. A critical portion of the front gate was non-functional. If the convoy realized they were being attacked from the rear, the lead truck might have a chance to punch through that weak point and escape, triggering a chaotic chase across the open desert. Almost simultaneously, the second thing went wrong, and this time it was human error. A gunman in the bed of the second truck, perhaps out of boredom or a sudden premonition, glanced up at the cliff face. He squinted against the blinding sunday, and then he saw it, an unnatural glint. It wasn't the natural reflection of light off rock. It was too sharp, too metallic. It was the sun, for a millisecond, catching the suppressed barrel of a SEAL sniper's rifle as he shifted his position by mere millimeters. To an untrained eye, it would have been nothing. But to a gunman seasoned by firefights, it was a sign of danger. He grabbed his radio, his voice a panicked, cracking shout in Spanish. "Cuidado, algo arriba, veo algo." Careful, something's up there, I see something. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, everything hung by a thread. Inside the command center, the silence was deafening. The order to attack hadn't been given because the full convoy was not yet in position. But if the alarm spread, 80 gunmen would begin firing wildly into the cliffs. They might not know the SEALs' exact positions, but with the sheer volume of ammunition they possessed, they could pin down the ambush force in their own trap, turning an overwhelming attack into a bloody battle of attrition. The perfect plan was on the verge of shattering. This is where training, discipline, and extraordinary courage take over. Not far from the faulty detonator, a SEAL Explosives Ordnance Disposal (EOD) specialist, lying motionless under a camouflage blanket, heard the alert in his earpiece. He didn't panic. He didn't wait for an order. He acted. With slow, almost imperceptible movements, he began to crawl forward under the blistering Sunday. Every inch of movement was an agony, a risk of being spotted. He could feel the eyes of dozens of gunmen just below. Sweat poured down his face, but his hands were steady. He reached the connector, saw it had been jostled just slightly loose. With deft fingers, he re-secured the line. A tiny LED light on his device switched from red to green. The circuit was live. At the same time, the sniper who had caused the glint recognized his mistake. He didn't flinch or move. He simply adjusted the sunshade on his scope, and the dangerous light vanished. Down in the canyon, other gunmen heard the warning over the radio. They looked up but saw nothing but silent rock. The convoy's commander, after a few tense seconds, barked into his radio, telling the lookout to shut up and stop being paranoid. They were too close to their goal, too confident in their safety to believe in a ghost. Their suspicion dissolved just seconds before it would have hardened into certainty. In the command center, the red warning vanished. The officers let out a collective silent breath of relief. On the cliff, the EOD tech had crawled back into his position, his heart still hammering. The fragile thread had not broken. The box was sealed again, tighter than ever. As the last truck rolled past the final seismic sensor, a calm voice spoke over the SEAL's communication network. All elements in position. The box is locked. Stand by. The deadly silence returned to the canyon. But this time, it had a different weight. It was the silence before the thunder. 1:29 a.m. The canyon had swallowed the convoy whole. 19 red dots formed a perfect line on the screens at Davis-Monthan. The steel serpent was fully trapped inside its box. The voice on the radio was still calm, but it carried a lethal finality. Hold! Hold! Execute now! The first sound was not a gunshot, but a deafening crack of thunder that tore the silence apart. The two M18A1 Claymore fields at the front and rear of the canyon detonated almost simultaneously. Thousands of steel ball bearings ripped into the lead and final trucks with the sound of tearing fabric. Tires exploded instantly. Windshields disintegrated into a million tiny pieces. The two gunners on the lead .50 caliber machine guns were thrown from their positions, their bodies tossed into the air like broken dolls. The convoy's arrogance evaporated in a microsecond, replaced by sheer shrieking chaos. The sound of screams rending metal and desperate revving engines echoed off the canyon walls. The echo of the blasts hadn't even faded when the second movement of the symphony began. From 1,000 feet, the AC-130 joules Ghost Rider, an instrument of the night, unleashed its fury in broad daylight. Its 30mm Bushmaster cannon opened up. Tracer rounds stitched down the canyon like molten rain, punching through the truck's thin armor with contemptuous ease. Cabins were shredded, engine blocks ignited, turning the steel machines into raging torches. It was complete pandemonium. Cartel gunmen scrambled out of the truck beds, some firing blindly at the cliffs, others diving for the dry ditches, choking on the smoke and dust. But this was when the trap tightened. The cliffs erupted in return fire. 160 SEAL operators opened up nearly as one. The dry suppressed crack of M4A1 carbines was joined by the heavier boom of SCAR-H battle rifles, which punched neat holes through armored doors. Every muzzle flash from below was answered by three from above. It wasn't a gunfight, it was an execution. Towards the rear, one pickup tried to make a U-turn, slamming into the truck behind it. The engine screamed and metal buckled, but its path was blocked by the burning carcass of the final vehicle. And then, a high-pitched whistle cut through the air. A laser-guided artillery shell painted by the Reaper drone slammed directly into an ammo truck in the middle of the convoy. That explosion was different. It was a terrifying release of energy, a violent, sympathetic detonation. The fireball swallowed three vehicles at once, leaping 100 feet into the air. Its heat so intense, it scorched the rocks on the canyon walls, forcing the SEALs to press deeper into their positions. In the midst of this hell, one small group of gunmen tried to mount a defense. They hauled an RPG-7 grenade launcher onto the roof of a Ford F-350. The tube wavered as it was aimed toward the cliffs. But before it could fire a single 7.62mm round from an Mk-13 sniper rifle tore through the gunner's shoulder. The RPG slipped from his grasp, fell, and detonated at their feet. The blast killed 3 men instantly, sending fiery shrapnel everywhere. The canyon was no longer a road. It had become a foundry. In the space of 7 minutes, half the convoy was a smoking, twisted ruin. The screams mixed with the roar of automatic weapons and the hiss of burning narcotics, which gave off a toxic, acrid smoke. The resistance began to crumble. Some gunmen tried to scale the cliffs, scrabbling at the rock, only to be picked off by precision fire from above. Others huddled behind the twisted hulls of vehicles, firing desperate bursts from their AK-47 seconds. But every muzzle flash was a beacon that betrayed their position. The Reaper, still circling silently, identified a Ford Raptor near the middle of the convoy, making a desperate break for it. It rammed through debris trailing fire. For a moment, it looked like it might get through, but then an AGM-114 Hellfire missile was released. There was a blinding flash and an explosion that simply vaporized the Raptor, leaving nothing but a crater and raining debris. The battle had become a massacre. The steel serpent that had roared with confidence was now nothing more than the charred skeletons of trucks, scattered bodies, and plumes of black smoke. The Americans had turned the canyon into an incinerator, and the cartel into ash. The arrogant parade had ended in a symphony of destruction. 12:02 p.m. The desert fell silent. The last gunshot faded into the smoke, leaving only the crackle of burning steel and the sound of the wind whistling through twisted wreckage. The canyon floor, which minutes before had vibrated with the roar of 19 armored trucks, now looked like a graveyard of metal skeletons. Flames licked at shattered cabins. Pools of molten rubber soaked into the earth. The air was thick with the acrid stench of chemicals, cordite, and the smell of tons of narcotics incinerated into worthless ash. Into this desolation, the ghosts emerged. The SEAL Team's 6 operators moved deliberately down from the cliffs, advancing into the wreckage. Their rifles were still raised, scanning left and right, clearing any last pockets of resistance, however small. Commands were passed in short-clipped whispers over their radios. Flashlight beams cut through the black smoke. Any gunman still holding a weapon was neutralized without hesitation. Those who had thrown their weapons down and raised their hands in surrender were zip-tied and forced face down into the sand. Their professionalism was chilling. There was no anger, no retribution, just cold efficiency. The job was not yet done. As the smoke began to clear, the full picture of the devastation came into focus, and with it the numbers. The cold, emotionless numbers that told the most complete story. 53 cartel gunmen were dead. Another 27 were captured, many of them wounded. All 19 vehicles were destroyed or disabled. Of the 80 men who had crossed the border that morning, not a single one escaped, and the prize was staggering. Forensics teams flown in by helicopter only minutes after the shooting stopped began their work. They recovered over 7.2 tons of unburnt narcotics packed tightly in reinforced compartments. A shipment worth over $420 million. DEA agents in hazmat suits began cataloging, photographing, and sealing every sample. Mobile floodlights were erected, turning the canyon into a macabre stage set, illuminating the scorched chassis, the scattered shell casings, and the charred piles of contraband. And then, there was the most important number, the one that testified to the absolute success of the planned U.S. casualties. 0 American fatalities. Only 2 SEALs sustained minor injuries, one from flying glass, another from shrapnel. Both were treated on site and quickly evacuated by an HH-60 watts Pavehawk rescue helicopter. Compared to the total annihilation on the canyon floor, it was an almost unbelievable result. At 12:18 p.m., the all-clear was confirmed. The AC-130 Joules Ghost Rider dipped its wing, its mission complete, and flew on. The Reaper drone climbed back to a safe altitude, maintaining overwatch as reinforcement troops arrived to secure the perimeter. In the command center at Davis-Monthan, the final tally appeared on the 12 glowing screens presented in the terse language of the military. 53 enemy Kaya, 27 detained, 19 vehicles neutralized, 0 US fatalities. For the cartel, this canyon was the path to profit. Instead, it had become a tomb. For the United States, this was not just a tactical victory. It was a demonstration of power, a warning that no matter how powerful, no matter how brazen, any force that crossed the line would be met with a precise and overwhelming response. As the midday sun beat down on the smoldering wreckage, the message was clear. America hadn't just fought back. America had erased. The silence in the canyon was not peace. but the emptiness left after a storm has passed, leaving nothing behind but cold numbers and a bloody lesson. As the last helicopters departed, carrying away the captured and the evidence, the desert returned to its natural silence. But it was a different silence, now haunted by what had just occurred. The scars on the cliff, faces the black scorch marks on the sand, and the twisted skeletons of the trucks would remain for years, a monument to arrogance and its downfall. The ambush of the 12th of July was more than just a firefight with a smuggling convoy. It was an event that would send long resonating echoes out from this single canyon into the underworld and the halls of power. The first and clearest echo was a message to transnational criminal organizations. For years, they had operated under an assumption that Western nations, particularly the US, were bound by rules of engagement, legal procedures, and bureaucracy. They believed they could exploit those weaknesses, operating in the gray area between crime and warfare. This ambush shattered that illusion. It demonstrated that when a threat is deemed serious enough, brazen enough, the world's most powerful military and intelligence apparatus can be deployed with the same ruthless efficiency as an overseas military campaign. The line had been drawn not with law but with firepower. The myth of an untouchable border was crushed in under 30 minutes. The second echo was a profound lesson in the nature of modern warfare. The engagement was a classic example of asymmetric warfare, but with the roles reversed. The cartel, with its superior numbers and heavy weapons, acted like a conventional force. The U.S. forces, meanwhile, employed sophisticated guerrilla tactics, patience, camouflage use of terrain, and striking at the time and place of their choosing. Victory belonged not to the side with more guns, but to the side that controlled the information and the environment. The operation's success was measured not in rounds fired, but in hours of surveillance conducted. It affirmed a truth of 21st century military doctrine. Intelligence is not just an enabler of warfare. Intelligence is warfare. The third echo was about the human element. Amidst all the advanced technology, the drones, the satellites, the thermal sensors, the victory was ultimately decided by the operators on the ground. It was decided by the cool head of the EOD tech fixing a detonator under the nose of the enemy. It was decided by the discipline of 160 men who lay still for hours in searing heat, waiting for the perfect moment. It was decided by the strategic planners who saw a kill box where others saw only a canyon. Technology was a force multiplier, but human will, courage, and intellect remained the primary engine. Finally, this ambush would be studied in military academies for years to come. A textbook example of the integration of intelligence, special operations forces, and air power. It showed how to eliminate a threat worth hundreds of millions of dollars with minimal cost and zero fatalities. It was a testament to the power of patience. In a world that demands instant action, this operation proved that true strength lies in not acting and waiting until every advantage is yours, and then delivering a blow so decisive the enemy never gets a chance to fire back. The echoes from that canyon would linger. They were a reminder that even in the most desolate of deserts, there are invisible lines. And for those foolish enough to cross them, the response would not be a negotiation but a symphony of destruction, leaving behind only silence, cold numbers, and a warning carved in the dust.